abortion across America. As some states push more extreme measures, the Supreme Court delivers a blow to the pro-life movement.
Everything that we did earlier in the day was a complete waste of time.
Heated testimony on Capitol Hill as the acting Attorney General answers questions from the new Democratic majority on a powerful House committee. And we sit down with a woman tasked with improving Medicaid and Medicare for Americans. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Supreme Court stops a pro-life law in Louisiana. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Browder. The High Court ruling essentially places a temporary hold on a restrictive abortion measure from taking effect in Louisiana. And while the justices, they are determining whether or not they will hear arguments over the law the next session.
It comes just days after President Trump spoke about unborn children being made in the image of God in his State of the Union speech. George Thomas has the story.
Late Thursday, in what was a significant test of the Supreme Court's newly strengthened conservative majority, the justices ruled 5-4 to temporarily block a Louisiana abortion law from taking effect today. Chief Justice John Roberts joined the 4 liberal justices to prevent a law that would require abortion doctors to have admitting privileges at nearby hospitals. The ruling comes after Democrats in New York shocked millions of Americans by passing a law that makes abortion legal even up to the point of birth. The state's governor hailing it as the most aggressive women's rights achievement in the nation.
This administration defies American evolution. We're supposed to be moving forward. We're supposed to be advancing. We're supposed to live and learn. We're supposed to be growing.
Democrats in Virginia tried to pass a similar law but failed. The New Mexico House has passed a bill that would make abortion legal throughout all 9 months of a pregnancy if Roe v. Wade is overturned. If the state Senate passes it, the Democratic governor says she'll sign it. In Vermont, lawmakers there want to pass a bill that critics say would make abortion an absolute right for any reason. It's all part of an aggressive campaign by abortion advocates and groups like NARAL and others who want to significantly expand access to abortion in states where Democrats won last fall. President Trump and GOP lawmakers are pushing back.
To defend the dignity of every person, I am asking Congress to pass legislation to prohibit the late-term abortion of children who can feel pain in the mother's womb.
While Trump's call for a ban on late-term abortions is unlikely to happen in Congress, Republican legislators in several states like Florida, Kentucky, Ohio, South Carolina, and Tennessee are campaigning for tougher anti-abortion measures, like the heartbeat law that would ban abortions after a fetal heartbeat is detected. Meanwhile, House Republicans want legislation that would require mandatory medical care for late-term abortions where the fetus is alive outside the mother's womb.
I want to ask mothers across this country to join with us to make sure that we don't see our maternity wards turned into killing fields.
And while Democrats in more states try to introduce far-reaching abortion rights bills, polls show the public is against such measures. While 60% of Americans believe abortion should be legal in the first 3 months of pregnancy, only 28% support abortion in the second trimester. And that number plummets to just 13% for abortions during the third trimester. George Thomas, CBN News.
Well, Katherine Glen Foster of Americans United for Life joins us now for more. Katherine, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
Justice Roberts, of course, known for being a conservative. I think this latest ruling in the Louisiana case took a lot of people by surprise. Is this something that we can expect to see more of from the Supreme Court?
You know, one thing that we found really interesting at Americans United for Life is that this was a very narrow ruling. It was a 5-4 decision, and that Justice Kavanaugh actually went with Justices Alito, Thomas. We saw that the conservative bloc there would have dissented and did dissent from this decision. So while the Chief Justice did decide to to go with the court's more liberal members at this point, being a little bit coy perhaps. We do know that that we're making progress because we do have Justice Kavanaugh on the conservative side on this issue.
Yeah, this is a temporary stay for a law that would have taken effect this week. Could the court come back with a more lasting decision on abortion laws, and when would that happen?
That could happen at any time. You know, this is a temporary stay. It will automatically expire at some point, whether the case is not timely appealed, whether the court makes a final decision and says, no, this is a constitutional law, this is perfectly fine. And what this law does, it's important to remember, is ensure that, that doctors who are performing abortions have admitting privileges at a local hospital. It's a common sense health and safety regulation ensuring that, in fact, when women are harmed or injured by abortion, that they're able to have a kind of seamless transfer here. So it's common sense, it's about women's health and safety, and it's important. So we believe that the Supreme Court will ultimately find that this law is constitutional.
Yeah. A law in New York, of course, we've heard a lot about this one, legalizes abortion up until the moment of birth. In Virginia, they were considering the same idea. Other states as well, New Mexico. Is there a push, would you say, in this country right now for expanding abortion rights?
You know, the abortion activists who are working in the states along these lines, they are Johnny-come-latelys. They are doing everything they can in the states that they see as being vulnerable to this because they see that the demise of Roe is imminent. But the pro-life movement has been in the states for decades, since before Roe v. Wade. We've had nearly 500 victories in the last several years alone, just working state by state, law by law, to ensure that there's protections for mothers and for unborn children on the books. And so we're seeing tremendous progress there. And so that's where we expect to continue to see progress. That's where we want to see progress, through the democratic process, as opposed to simply through the Supreme Court and 9 unelected judges.
Yeah, but when you do see, you know, these things happening in New York and New Mexico and Virginia and different places, is it not discouraging?
It is definitely discouraging. It's one of those things that's disappointing but not surprising. It's the states that we know would be on the more liberal, on the more pro-abortion side after Roe does fall. And just to see them enshrining abortion even more thoroughly into law, enshrining it as a right in their states, it's extremely discouraging. It's heartbreaking. It's something that we are working on the ground day in and day out to fight back against. But you know, we're still winning. So so I just try to keep that balance so that there is still that hope, even as, you know, we see these really discouraging pushes within some of these states.
Yeah, 13% of Americans support this late-term abortion. It is widely unpopular. Well, Katherine, Glen Foster, thank you so much. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Lawmakers now have 1 week to come up with a funding compromise before the country faces another potential partial government shutdown. The president has remained steadfast in his demand for money to build a border wall, and although she has vowed no money for a wall, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi also is insisting that there won't be another shutdown. For more, we now turn to our Capitol Hill correspondent, Abigail Robertson. Abigail, where do the negotiations stand now?
Well, the Washington Post reported this afternoon that they had sources tell them that there is $2 billion in this conference committee compromise bill, but Democrats have already refuted that, saying that that the negotiations are ongoing and they do not want to go above that $1.6 billion for a physical barrier at the wall. Now, the bill was supposed to be ready this afternoon. That's what Speaker Pelosi had originally requested, but the conferees asked for more time. So we're expecting to see that compromise bill by Monday. But I spoke to one of the conference committee members, a Democrat from Texas, Congressman Henry Cuellar, and he told me that he believes that they will eventually find something that can pass both the House and Senate. Take a look.
I feel cautiously optimistic that we can do it. We have to find a balance between our neighbor to the south and at the same time, not only to our neighbor of the south, the trade and tourism, but have security. And I feel very confident that if we put the technology, the personnel, and I'll say this as a Democrat, find ways to do some enhanced physical barriers, we can get there.
Now, again, we don't know what number they're working on, what the final number for a physical barrier. Even if it is $2 billion, that's still far below the $5 billion that President Trump has requested.
Now, Abby, in the lead up to the last shutdown, Nancy Pelosi and President Trump were directly involved. Why aren't they as involved in this round of negotiations?
Well, lawmakers from both sides of the aisle have asked them to stand down from being a part of these negotiations. And for the most part, they have. They've been letting the conference committee do their work without having a lot of comments or tweets about what's going on. But I don't expect, once this bill finally is released, hopefully on Monday, I don't expect either one of them to stay quiet for much longer.
Well, Abby, some federal workers went weeks without being paid during the last shutdown, and I understand some who were set to receive back pay still haven't seen that money. Is that right?
Yes, what we're hearing is that it's kind of a mess. There are some federal workers who have not been paid yet, or their amounts have been wrong, especially those who worked overtime. There's been a lot of trouble with getting them the amounts that they're owed for the overtime. I spoke with someone this afternoon, and she told me that she got her 2 back pay paychecks, and they were short about $400. And then in her paycheck today, they had that $400 included, but then they had overpaid her. And she said that this was the case for many of her coworkers that she works with. So it really right now seems like it's kind of a mess. And again, the shutdown was pretty unexpected. So they were not ready. The National Finance Center was not quite prepared for this. It's 35 days, and they had just a few days to give about 800,000 federal workers their back pay and their paychecks. And it's not surprising that there's many errors, and not to mention there's a lot of anxiety from these federal employees who aren't sure if they're going to have to deal with another shutdown by the end of next week. So there's definitely a lot of confusion, and hopefully they'll get it sorted out soon.
That's right, a lot of tough times for both the federal workers and contractors. Abigail Robertson on Capitol Hill. Thanks, Abby.
Well, there was considerable tension today on Capitol Hill as Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker faced tough questions before the House Judiciary Committee. CBN White House correspondent Ben Kennedy joins us now for more on that story. Ben, a lot of the testimony today, it's centered around the Russia investigation.
Yeah, Jenna, no doubt you're right. Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker made it clear that he did not discuss the Russia probe with President Trump. But that being said, it did not stop lawmakers from asking about it over and over again.
Have you communicated any information you learned in that briefing to President Trump?
Democrats took aim at Whitaker, hoping to get insight into the Russia probe.
It's a yes or no question. Have you communicated anything you learned in that briefing about the investigation to President Trump? Yes or no?
I do not intend today to talk about my private conversations with the President of the United States. But to answer your question, I have not talked to the President of the United States about the special counsel's investigation.
The questioning centered around Whitaker's conversations with White House officials, the president, and his role in the Mueller investigation.
Did Rod Rosenstein give the special counsel the authority to investigate specific Americans?
So yes, under the special counsel regulations, that's the whole purpose.
The showdown even got a bit heated at times.
In your capacity as Acting Attorney General, have you ever been asked to approve any request or action to be taken by the special counsel?
Mr. Chairman, I see that your 5 minutes is up.
Mr. Attorney General, we're not joking here, and your humor is not acceptable.
The House Intel Committee is also launching an investigation into the president, his family, his finances, and possible Russia ties. The commander-in-chief lashed out on Twitter, calling it presidential harassment. When Whitaker was appointed as acting AG, Democrats called for him to recuse himself from the Mueller probe because he criticized it in the past. He tried to make clear his decision not to step away has caused any issues.
I have not interfered in any way with the special counsel's investigation.
Very good. Thank you. My time has expired.
Now, when talking about border security, Whitaker did say there is a connection between drugs at the southern border and the opioid crisis, and Whitaker is also the first cabinet official to appear before this Congress this year. John, Jenna?
Certainly a testy exchange. Now, even as of yesterday, it was still a question if Whitaker would even appear to testify. Talk a little bit about what made him go before the panel today.
Yeah, John, it was unclear if Whitaker would even show up until late Thursday. Now, he did agree only after the Judiciary Committee dropped the threat of a subpoena.
All right. White House correspondent Ben Kennedy. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks.
Well, coming up, how this woman is making it her mission to make Medicaid and Medicare better for all Americans. The U.S. government says America spends about $3.5 trillion on health care. That's more than $10,000 per American, according to the latest figures. And that number continues to rise each year. It's an issue President Trump highlighted in his State of the Union address this week.
The next major priority for me and for all of us should be to lower the cost of health care and prescription drugs and to protect patients with pre-existing conditions.
And as lawmakers in Washington debate the future of health care, the woman in charge of Medicaid and Medicare is trying to improve the services under the laws still in place.
Here again is Abigail Robertson with a report on new updates that could affect you.
After President Trump nominated Seema Verma as the administrator for Medicare and Medicaid services, she knew moving from the private to public sector would be a challenge. Yet she wanted to help her country and even made the decision to commute each week between Indiana and D.C. to oversee multi-billion-dollar programs utilized by 130 million Americans.
Saw some of the things that were going on in healthcare and realized that our country was going in the wrong direction on healthcare.
One of the first things she wanted to tackle, patient confusion.
You don't have the information that you need in terms of how much are things going to cost. You don't know about the quality, and you don't have your medical records. I think there's a lot of confusion.
Verma wants to give patients the necessary information to make the best decisions about their health care through an initiative called the Blue Button 2.0, or My Healthy Data.
The federal government spent some $36 billion on investing in doctors and hospitals having electronic medical records, and I think that's exciting. But what happened in that is that all of the information is siloed. It sort of stayed in your doctor's office. So before it was a filing cabinet, and right now it's an electronic silo kind of right inside the computer.
Verma told CBN News how a personal emergency brought her face to face with this issue.
I get on the phone with the paramedics and they said, you know, your husband's not breathing. Is he on any medications? What's his healthcare background?
Information Verma didn't have.
It was a very difficult moment, just sort of there's so much going on, the panic of not being with my kids and wondering what was going on with him. For the medical professionals that were treating them, they didn't have the information that they needed to be able to diagnose him.
While her husband recovered, they still had to jump through hoops to get his information.
When I left the hospital, they gave me essentially a CD-ROM, and they said, here's his healthcare information.
In today's tech world, however, many computers won't even read CD-ROMs anymore.
I think the big issue was that the information, a lot of the information wasn't even on what they gave me, and so there's all of this information about him that's sort of trapped at the hospital.
Verma says this lack of access is especially difficult for patients who move or see multiple healthcare providers.
We're working on an initiative to make it very clear to providers that that data and that information belongs to the patient. It is theirs. And we want to make sure that when they leave, the providers, they have that information.
Under Verma, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, is requiring providers to share this information with patients or face penalties. Verma believes that will not only save time and money, but could lead researchers to find breakthroughs.
Because it's really going to give rise to the type of innovation that we've seen in the American healthcare system, but I think it's going to bring it to a much higher level.
What has the response been from some of the patients who are trying this?
Well, I think people are excited about it. You know, we hear stories all the time. I remember talking to some of our staff saying, you know, I'm going to a new doctor, and the doctor asked for all of my healthcare information, and she said, she's like, I don't have time for this, to go around to every doctor asking for information. And with this type of tool, she should be able to aggregate all of that information.
Verma tells CBN News they have more than 1,000 app developers working to make this data more user-friendly for patients. And she believes this program will continue, no matter which party controls the White House.
I think this is something that we have heard from both sides of the aisle about how important this is, and it's important on so many different dimensions.
Although healthcare negotiations are moving slow on Capitol Hill, Verma is trying to make the best of her current authority.
From my perspective, I'm going to focus on what I can control. That's one of life's lessons, to focus on the things that you can do. You know, we always stand ready to work with Congress if they want to make changes, and to provide them with the support as they consider changes. But in the meantime, I don't want to stand still, and I want to do everything that I can to make sure that healthcare is working for every American.
That means working toward the constant goal of lowering health care costs and making sure Medicare and Medicaid are sustainable.
And what has your experience been like working in the Trump administration?
For me, it's exciting to be here because we are with an administration and a president that isn't afraid of disrupting the status quo on behalf of the American people. And that's what I like about the administration, is that it's all about, it's okay to be disruptive. The status quo isn't working for so many different Americans. And so the idea here is to be bold and make changes that are going to have a lasting impact to improve health care for our country.
Verma believes the changes happening at CMS can have an impact felt throughout the entire healthcare system. Reporting from Washington, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
All right, when we come back, remembering the life of one rabbi who helped bridge the gap between Christians and Jews around the world. Israel and the world lost a champion of Jewish-Christian relations this week.
That's right, Rabbi Akhil Eckstein, founder of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, was laid to rest Thursday. John Wagi brings us the story from Jerusalem.
Hundreds came to pay tribute to the man known as the ultimate bridge builder. Mourners included U.S. Ambassador David Friedman and former Jerusalem Mayor Nir Barkat.
He was a man who understood the true hardships and challenges that exist for us and the distress in the state of Israel, and how to open the hearts of millions of donors around the world.
Rabbi Eckstein started the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews in 1983. Since then, it's raised more than $1.5 billion to help Jews in Israel, the former Soviet Union, Latin America, and more than 58 other countries.
I think from the very beginning, I remember when my brother went out to Chicago for the march in Skokie. It was the start of anti-Semitism in a different way in America. And the partners he found were the evangelical Christians.
Eckstein's daughter Yael carries on the family legacy as the global executive vice president.
There's one specific gift, Abba, which is the greatest gift I've received from you. It's the commitment to hold family over everything else in the world.
Eckstein's younger brother Beryl told CBN News that the more he saw his brother's work, the more he understood and loved it.
Wherever Akhil went, there was a bond, especially with Pat Robertson, who was such an influence on Akhil's life, and I think Akhil was on his. That love, that shared mission, was something that I and my whole family cherish.
Eckstein pursued three goals: build bridges between Christians and Jews, deepen Christian understanding of the Jewish roots of their faith, and develop a practical way to help the Jewish people and Israel. Rabbi Eckstein is survived by his wife Joelle, 3 daughters, and 8 grandchildren.
The memory I always have of my brother is him praying, and whenever I was weak, he was always there to hold my hands.
John Wagi, CBN News, Jerusalem.
And for more on the life of Rabbi Eckstein, you can tune into this week's Jerusalem Dateline. You can find that tonight at 9:30 Eastern on the CBN News Channel.
All right, well, that is going to do it for Faith Nation tonight.
Have a great weekend.